Hello, my name is Brady Bonner. This is my presentation on compliances and frameworks for iBank Financials. We'll start with an overview of who iBank Financials is. iBank Financials is a publicly traded company based in New York City. They have smaller remote offices in all major cities across the United States. Their products on offer are insurance, annuities, and investing. More recently, they have started to offer investing in cryptocurrency as a new service. Which compliances does iBank Financials need to meet? Since iBank Financials accepts credit card payments for their services, they will need to be sure that they are compliant with the payment card industry data security standards. iBank also offers financial and investment services. This means they would also need to comply with the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. Finally, iBank Financials is a publicly traded company. As such, they will need to ensure that they comply with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Which compliance organizations would iBank need to work with to achieve their needed compliances? iBank would need to work with the PCI-SSC, or the Payment Card Industry Security Standards Council, since they would be subject to the PCI DSS. They will also need to work with the Federal Trade Commission, or FTC, since they will need to be compliant with the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, and they will need to be compliant with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. As such, they will need to be working with the Security and Exchange Commission. What are the credit card issues preventing compliance? One of the issues preventing compliance is that the company is storing customer credit card data on their servers. While this in and of itself isn't an issue, whether the data is stored properly and it is encrypted isn't specified. We also need to know the number of transactions processed annually by iBank. We do need to make sure that all credit card data is being maintained in a manner which complies with the PCI DSS, that it is protected properly, and that their network is up to snuff. Since they have offices across the United States and process outstanding payments every day, it is entirely possible that they could be a Level 2 or Level 1 merchant according to the PCI DSS. Knowing this information for sure will allow iBank to prepare to become compliant and retain their ability to process credit card payments. What are some of the technology issues that would prevent iBank Financials from becoming compliant? Some of the issues that stood out to me would be how credit card data is stored. All the credit card data that they do store will need to be encrypted at rest and while it is in use. There's also the use of personal tablets connected to the corporate VPN for company work. These devices are not owned or controlled by iBank Financial. On these devices, the employees of iBank will most likely be accessing sensitive customer information, and potentially storing some of that data, intentionally or not, on the devices. There's also the potential use of shadow IT on these devices. The owners of them might be using services like Google Drive or iCloud to store work documents. Another issue that will need to be addressed is the shared wireless network that iBank allows the insurance company to use. While it may create strain temporarily on the relationship between the two companies, not having control over every device on the network is a risk for creating vulnerabilities. If the insurance company has a compromised device, it may be intercepting traffic or potentially being used to try and compromise other devices on the network. How can we address some of these issues? The server that we're storing the credit card information on, we need to make sure that it meets the standards of the PCI DSS. We want to install and maintain a firewall and antivirus. We also want to make sure that we're not using the defaults on passwords for like the router and other devices on the network. Anytime that we are storing the credit card data, we need to make sure that it is encrypted This will be during times that it is just being stored, as well as any time that it is in transit or being used. We'll also need to implement forms of access management, ensuring that each person who has computer access has a unique ID. We also need to monitor all access to the network resources and the cardholder data, and work under the principle of zero trust. We need to limit physical access to the cardholder data and establish testing procedures for the security of the stored data. The other issue that we could address was the use of personal tablets. We can actually address this by issuing corporate tablets, which are configured for secure and convenient use away from the office. These will be connected to the VPN at all times, and they can be locked down to only allow use of corporate assets. What kind of penalties are there for non-compliance? With the PCI DSS, one of the major penalties is the loss of the ability to process credit card payments from any of the credit card payment networks that exist, like Visa, MasterCard, so on and so forth. Under the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, there are personal fines per violation. Those can be up to $10,000 per violation. There are also fines for the institution, which can be up to $100,000 per individual violation. There is also the chance that the institution, its officers and directors, could also be imprisoned for not more than 5 years. This could be in addition to those fines. And under Sarbanes-Oxley, there is a mixture of fines and imprisonment depending on the severity of the violation. These range anywhere from 5 years, as well as some fines for things like failing to maintain audits and review paperwork for at least 5 years. These go all the way up to 20 years for mail and wire fraud. There's also fines upwards of $1 million. This could also come with a 10-year prison sentence if the CEO or CFO recklessly violate their certification of the company's financial statements. What are a few of the things that we would need for a compliance auditor? Some of the things that we would need would be a return on capital completed by a qualified security assessor, as well as reports on quarterly scans by an approved scanning vendor. And we need to ensure that we can truthfully complete an attestation of compliance. We would also want to have all accounting data and all transaction records ready for a compliance auditor. As far as I can tell, there shouldn't be any conflicts between the different compliances. They do seem to have little areas of overlap, and as we become compliant with one, it should become even easier to become compliant with the others. Should NIST 853 be implemented? I think that it should. Implementing this framework and using its guidelines could make compliance a lot easier. We've got guidelines like AC6, which entails implementing the principle of least privilege. There's also AC18, wireless access. These state that we should have established connection requirements and implementation guidelines for each type of wireless access, and establish what devices should be allowed to connect before they connect. Another example would be CA7, continuous monitoring. We would need to outline what needs to be monitored, how frequently it needs to be monitored, and establish an ongoing monitoring strategy. There are a lot of guidelines in NIST 853. It would definitely be worth implementing. Do we have any conflicts currently with NIST 800-53? There are two main conflicts that I can see very easily that we have. One conflict is with AC18, where we are sharing the wireless network and do not have control over all devices on the network. The other is AC20, external systems. Because we're using the personal tablets, we do not meet the requirements for these standards.